Well, welcome everyone. This is one of those things that I never thought we'd be called on to do at least any time in the next 2 decades, but here we are. Um, I'd like to welcome everyone to this memorial service for our friend and colleague and mentor, Paul Lysaker. I'd especially like to welcome his wife, Judy, uh, his brother, John, and his mom, Yvonne. I know it's been a difficult several days for all of us trying to make sense of what's happened and try to pick up all the pieces. To have someone who is so important to so many people in so many ways, it has been an incredible loss. Paul's professional contributions were nothing short of extraordinary. Hundreds of articles and chapters, several books, with his influence stretching across the globe, connecting with colleagues from all over the world, many of whom are here with us now. Paul also trained scores of students, profoundly shaping their careers, many of them becoming colleagues and collaborators. And with here again, and this is truly kind of exemplifies Erickson's sense of generativity with our lives and doing things that grow and create and move on beyond our lives. One of the other remarkable things about Paul is how he engaged with others, kind of blending a deep intellectual insight with, I don't know, I guess for a better word, kind of like a childlike playful humor. And we all know how conversations with him could journey from developments in psychopathology to contemporary art, the most recent absurdity in the workplace, or lamenting the state of the New York Jets, especially their quarterback situation. But you always knew when he sort of got that gleam in his eye, he kind of looked down over his glasses, raised his eyebrow. You knew you were off on a journey of some sort for a little bit from what you're supposed to be talking about in the conversation. Paul and I got to know each other when he arrived at the Indianapolis VA in the late 1990s. We were both working. We connected pretty quickly, both on a professional and personal level. Though my own professional path soon diverged from the clinical world in the VA, we stayed in touch with the promise that I would try to collaborate with him if I had the opportunity. Fortunately, I had that opportunity about 6 or 7 years ago and came back into Paul's professional orbit and sort of came to serve as an editor and semi-organizer of things related to merit. I found this to be an incredibly collegial experience and a good complementary use of our skills. This was despite occasional debates about the importance of using paragraphs and headings, whether a sentence with 5 or 6 independent clauses was desirable, and what a general understanding of deadlines might be. I see some other folks sort of smirking, so I assume this was not an experience unique to me, and I probably shouldn't personalize it. Our work also gave us the opportunity to spend time together, not just working, but we had a chance to travel to a couple of conferences and also had the pleasure of having Paul and Judy come out to visit us in Colorado more than once. At the end of the day, Paul is my friend, and I will always miss him. One of his cornerstone ideas was the power of narrative, our ability to weave stories about ourselves and others. And today we've come together to kind of share our stories of Paul and the stories we created with him and about him. Several folks have asked to speak, and I'll list them in the chat in a second as a way to keep ourselves organized. We're going to try to keep this about to an hour because we know that many folks are balancing it with their clinical work and other sorts of calendars. But if we have some time at the end of the session, we'll open the floor to anyone else who might have something they would like to share. I guess we can just sort of work in order if someone would like to deviate from this. Alicia, would you like to start?
Sure. Um, a friend of mine asked me what I wanted to say today, and I was kind of struck by that question. For me, it was an easy answer, the story. So Paul was my practicum supervisor for 2 years, 2014 to 2016 at the PRC in Indianapolis at the VA. I loved my first year of practicum training there so much that I requested my program allow me to stay on. At that time, I think there were some days I felt like what I was learning was magic. To peel back the layers of a seemingly inaccessible person, hear their story, and see how much could come from that was a profound experience for me. I remember the group supervision, so dynamic with Paul, Kelly, Christina, the rest of us. I remember it felt good to experience when Paul was proud of my interventions and my work as I grew as a student. I think many of us know that feeling and that experience. Of course, there was the peppering of off-color jokes that was Paul's style. That training experience and work with Paul also afforded me to address some things in my own life and transform as a person as well. Particularly that second year, I shared more about my father's decline. Paul shared with me about his father. I remember one of those conversations in his office to this day. My early experiences with Merit allowed me to peel back the layers of what was happening with my dad and make sense of my own suffering. And I remain very grateful for that, because I don't think I would have leaned into connecting with my dad as much without the experience of Merit and Paul. Paul also gave me opportunities that stretched my skills and vision for myself in the area of research. And as I moved into a postdoc and career focused on PTSD, I always felt included and invited. I knew that I was on a mission, no matter where I worked, to get people to think, and that any opportunity I could, I would speak about Merit. I knew doing that would be a way to live out respect to Paul being so influential for me, and those are things I continue to plan to do. The Merit monthly meetings always breathe life into me, and I think another important thing that I experienced was Paul supported me 100%, and I knew I could always go back and think with him that we would always be connected no matter where I worked or what I did. I think now that is the hardest part, feeling the absence of that. I think it's so remarkable to look at someone's life and know they left a legacy before they were even finished. The whole experience of Paul's death reaffirms for me the importance of living every day in all aspects of life, saying the thing no one wants to hear, and stirring the pot ever so slightly with humor in a boring meeting or a meeting that needs some pep. Paul was an example to me of how to have a meaningful influence and be myself in a work environment that does not always naturally lend itself to that. I feel extremely privileged to have had Paul in my life, and I know most of what I do on a daily basis in my career going forward will have its roots in the beginning of this story, which I've chronicled to you today.
Thanks, Alicia. Kyle Miner?
Yeah, hey everyone. It's really great to see so many familiar faces, familiar names, people that I haven't met. But I mean, what really strikes me a lot thinking about this over the past few weeks is just I've been in Indianapolis, so worked with Paul for the past 10 years really, and so much of my time here was just intertwined with Paul from like the research side. I mean, thinking about like the clinical side, and just kind of talking about life and those types of things. I mean, it was just, I don't know, he was such a big part of my time here. Both as like a mentor, a colleague, a friend. All of those roles were the lines between those roles were really blurred. But yeah, I think the thing I think about the most with Paul was just, his generosity, generosity with data that he had, more than anything, generosity with time. I see, some of my students, or some of Michelle Salyer's former students, and so many of them got to have this experience with Paul as well. He was someone that really never said no. He was always able to meet with you, and it wasn't just like a check mark on his calendar. He was very present in those meetings. I think it's something that stands out. I can see how great of a clinician he was, just because he was so present whenever he was with you, whenever he was talking about things. He was this calming presence. Like whenever someone turned something down, I would go and I would be angry about it and complaining about it. I mean, Paul would have a great perspective on it, and I don't know, would just be there and be able to think about like what the next steps are. Um, he's someone that carved out this really unique research area, and you'd never know it just from like interacting with him. Just the way, the amount and how prolific he was. It's not something that that he talked about in ways that sometimes other people do. He was just very um generous, humble about those types of things. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess the other thing I would say, I met his mom, I met his brothers just a few weeks ago, and I went into this like academic side part of it. And I think every time I brought this up, like they would stop me and they would talk about that. They would say something to the effect of, yeah, but he was a little bit crazy too, right? And yeah, that was definitely a part of Paul. He had all of this dark humor and these inside jokes. And those are the things I think I'll miss the most in many ways. Like I remember going into meetings with him and I'd have this like very structured like list of things that I wanted to talk about. And that list would totally break down in a matter of minutes because he would have, I don't know, some inside joke, some nickname. I mean, I can remember so many of the nicknames he had for people on this call as we went through things. And I don't know, it was really fun. It was just really fun to be around him and to be able to feel that. And I think I'll end by saying this. Like the other thing I'm struck by is just like thinking about this over the few weeks, like how I took for granted, like, hey, this was going to continue. We were going to be able to do all these things for so long, and I took some of that for granted, and just being sad about that, but also trying to reframe that and just being grateful for all of the time that we got to spend together. And he really shaped the way that I look at things from both a research perspective and just from life as well. So certainly, I mean, very thankful for my time with Paul. So thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Eleni, would you like to?
Yes, thank you, Rick. This is hard. I had the privilege to meet Paul 15 years ago. It was just after I gave birth to my youngest daughter. And David Rowe here, my friend, told me, well, Paul is coming to Israel. And I said, but I just gave birth. And he told me, well, you need to meet him, come with your baby. And so I came with my baby and I met Paul for the first time then. And since then, I had really the privilege to have a long-term collaboration and friendship with him. He was an amazing, unique person with enormous generosity and careness to others. It was expressed with the way he talked about his patient, his colleagues, his friends, his family, his dog. I have learned from him so much professionally and on life in general. And although I live in Israel, working with Paul and being in touch with him was part of my routine via Zoom meetings, emails, WhatsApp messages, in addition to meeting in conferences or visiting Indiana or Israel. I am grateful and feel lucky for knowing Paul, and I cherish the time we spent together also with other friends, developing ideas and thinking together. I think that Paul was also amazing in connecting people around the world, and I will also be forever grateful for the dear friends I have that he introduced me with. I think that if we have done a social network analysis, Paul was evidently the most central node connecting many of us. His ideas and values expressed in his work will continue to affect science and practice. And I will miss spending time together with Paul in conferences or while visiting each other. I will miss the routine Zoom meetings, the thinking together, writing together, sending each other photos of our walks with our dogs in our different landscape, a habit we developed during COVID while walking a lot with the dogs. I have in my mind the last time we spent time together 4 months ago when he came to Israel. He gave a great talk in a national local conference, and then we had a nice dinner at David Rowe home. Paul played the piano. We were all happy being together after the long COVID traveling restrictions. And this memory and other memories will stay with me. And I feel very sad for this loss. And I thank you all for the opportunity to be here together and share our grief. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elenid. Robert Schweitzer from Australia.
Okay. Thank you for organizing this. I must say I'm still finding it hard to believe, and so part of my presenting or talking this evening is just to try and make this real for not only myself, but Paul had a whole group in Australia. Every alternative for us early Saturday mornings, his late Friday evenings, he would run a seminar, which had an enormous impact on a number of people, some who've written me emails. I will share just one of those in a moment, or something inspired by it. But if I'm going to remember anything about Paul, well, there's so much I remember, and we worked together, but he spoke about therapy as being like a gym. He says it's like going to the gym, but this is for thinking and for developing one's feeling capacity. And that is really, in some ways, so central, this idea of what it means to be a person. And so Paul was a huge inspiration, both professionally and personally. One of the people in the group sent me an email, and she referred to a poem. I mean, I've adopted it just slightly, and it's really just 4 lines from James Foley, which I'm going to share with you. Drop a pedal in the water, in a minute you forget, but there's little waves are flowing and there's ripples circling yet. And those little waves are flowing to a great big wave have grown. You've disturbed a mighty river just by dropping a stone. And for me, Paul has just been an enormous influence, both on ourselves as therapists, the work we do, and who we are as people. Just with great thanks and appreciation for the time we had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert. Sarah Queller.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I was a doctoral intern at the VA this year, so I wanted to just share a few brief words to honor the immense privilege that it was to train with Paul. The first time that we met, Paul and I quickly realized that we attended the same small liberal arts college in Ohio, where we both studied English and psychology. And as a result, many of our early supervision sessions included reminiscences about our college experiences, the friendships we made with our roommates, the poems we devoured in first-year seminars. It turned out Paul and I lived in some of the same dorm buildings at Kenyon and shared similar experiences of feeling noticed and nurtured by the psychology faculty and slightly overlooked by certain haughty English professors. In what was perhaps a desperate quest to confront my own denial, earlier this week, I returned to campus. We call it the Hill. And as I walked through the grounds, I imagined a younger version of Paul than I ever knew, hunched over a philosophy text in Ascension Hall, waiting in line for undercooked food in Gun Commons, throwing a frisbee on the green at sunset. Paul truly embodied the liberal arts ethos of lifelong learning, curiosity, and collaboration. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of philosophy, jazz, and literature. And when he wasn't meeting with patients or supervisees, his stirring piano playing flooded the 5th floor of the VA with a vitality that always awakened me to the art of our work. Working with Paul was, in the true sense of the word, inspiring. Paul's generosity created the space for me to explore my thoughts in a non-judgmental but still challenging space. Paul fundamentally changed the way I relate to and view my clients. He centered agency, complexity, humility, and humor, and he helped me to shape my identity and confidence as a merit therapist. Paul had the ability to make you feel special and interesting while never hesitating to share when he saw things differently, which was a kind euphemism for letting you know that you'd gotten it wrong. One of my dearest memories was sharing with Paul that I'd earned my first professional position as a psychologist. Paul enveloped me in a hug that I'll never forget, and his enthusiasm was humbling and overwhelming. And it made me feel in that moment like I could affect change, I could carve out a career with purpose and meaning, and that my perspective mattered. And what turned out to be our final individual supervision session together the day before Paul died, he decided that now that we were colleagues, he could ask for my thoughts about a baffling social interaction that I'd witnessed between him and a coworker. He was positively bewildered by it, and we spent most of the session gleefully dissecting the interpersonal dynamics within our training program. Paul seemed to always have a glimmer in his eye when he found something amusing. Early in the year, Paul had me announce in nearly every meeting that I had adopted a Chiweenie puppy because he found the sound of the word so funny. For months, he called me Queller the Retractor because I one time accidentally published a blank note and had to retract it. And of course, he loved to refer to his trainees as evildoers. In the days since Paul's death, I've been fixated on an idea, of course, a half-baked idea that Paul would have helped to flesh out, that grief degrades decentration. It is nearly impossible to grasp the impact that Paul had on so many of us, most importantly on his family, but also on his lifelong friends, his colleagues of decades, his students. And yet I can't stop thinking about the half-written emails in my drafts folder detailing projects we were formulating together. I can't stop wondering what our first supervision as colleagues would feel like. And most importantly, I can't help but lament how much more time I thought we'd have together and how much more I could have learned from him. So I miss him bitterly. And I'll conclude, as Paul did at the end of every supervision session, with good stuff. I hope to honor Paul's legacy by doing good stuff for the rest of my career. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was nice. Phil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Reed. It's so great to see all of you here. For those of us who were far away from Indy and weren't able to take part in the official ceremonies, this is our opportunity. And I think this is centered on people who worked with Paul professionally, which was such a big part of his life. I don't have prepared comments, so I might ramble a little bit, but as most of you know, I worked with Paul. We had a research collaboration that for the last 17 or so years. And I just wanted to share two stories about the first and last time that I visited him in Indy. And so the first time was in 2008, and I was there with two doctoral students who are now doing great things in the field. And David Rowe was there, and you'll hear from David shortly. And we went over to Paul's house, and it was such a welcoming atmosphere, and there was wine, and he encouraged us to play music with his wonderful daughter, Mercedes. And so David ended up playing piano, I played guitar, and Mercedes played the cello, I believe is their instrument. And Paul danced around and seemed to be a little tipsy. And I guess what I thought from it was like, wow, this guy really has fun. This guy really enjoys his work. Here we are doing this serious stuff, and he thinks that this is just great, great opportunity to get together and have fun. And it doesn't make it less serious. It just meant that he really found joy in it. And the last time I was in Indy was in April. I also was at Paul and Judy's house, and it was just the three of us. And then Paul and I sat down and talked a bit. And I think I asked him a couple of questions. And one was like, have you ever thought of going and getting, like a university professor position somewhere, because you're so accomplished, you could get that easily pretty much. And he's like, no, I like what I'm doing. I'm happy with my situation here, and I don't need that. And it was sort of like so antithetical to the way that we're kind of taught to be so hyper competitive and just pursuing things just for brass rings. And he was like, this is what I like to do. I supervise people. I have a wonderful experience with that. I do therapy with people who I find fascinating and love to help. I get to do research. I write 1 million papers a day. What else what else would I want? So that was something that really struck me, because we're so much, it's so indoctrinated into us to like just pursue success without even thinking about what it means. So to him, what was important was to enjoy his life. And the other thing I said was like, hey, have you thought about retiring? Because I'm planning to retire as soon as I'm eligible to retire. He's like, no, as long as there are people who want to work with me and, want to be supervised by me, I'm happy. This is what I want to do. And meeting young people is great. And there's so many, supervisees here. And it was just one of the things that just kept him going and made him want to get up in the morning and keep going. And there was no evidence that he had any intention of slowing that down anytime soon. So those were just two things that really stuck with me, the joy and the love of training people and the love of working with clients, and just the contentment that he had in his life, and that he wasn't seeking any more than the things that he had. And those are just really beautiful things.
Thank you so much, Phil. Stephen?
Yes. Thank you so much for organizing this, because as Robert said, it's been very strange to try and make sense of this from a distance. It's hard to connect to. So a moment like this is really important, very meaningful. So thank you. So when I first met Paul, it was during the internship for my master's degree, and he'd actually been invited to give a couple of talks. Which was really good for me, because the first time I was too shy to approach him, because I didn't want to, he's a big professor. And I think all of you kind of know that Paul effect that he could have, because when I approached him, I was really nervous, and within seconds that was just gone, because he was so able to listen and pay attention, and made it clear that it was important that what you were saying never made you feel stupid or anything. I just remember that he was so good at exactly that, right? The thinking with you. And I really wonder if he knew how big of a part of my life he'd become, even though we didn't often have contacts. At crucial moments, he was there. He was at the start of my master's degree. He was the foundation of my entire Ph.D. And he's such an example to me in just everything that I do. Every week I do something that reminds me of Paul. When I talk to students, I think of, like, I try to emulate Paul in showing the same kind of generosity to my students. When I write a session report with a client, to my great annoyance, every time I write, I thought with client about X and Y. And when I worry about what I can do, whether I'm any good at any of this, I just often think, well, if a guy like Paul likes what I'm doing, then there must be something to it. So I very often use the word mentor when I describe Paul, and I really feel that word applies very well, because that's what he really was for me. He was always there for advice. I could always email him. We could call, and he was just foundational to everything I am as an academic, clinician, and to be honest, as a person. And I'd like to share one short example of how important his blend of honesty with friendship could be, because I'm quite long-winded as an author, and for a long time I kind of thought okay, well, I might be, but that's more of a problem of the world. It's not really me, it's the world that's at fault. But I kept that quiet, obviously. But I think he knew. And at some point, I sent him an email with a manuscript, and I just got one short email back in typical Paul fashion, with one sentence, nothing capitalized, no punctuation. And it just said, I'm sorry, but this is unreadable, period. And, obviously I was shocked, but I wasn't scared. I was shocked. In many cases, I would have been scared for my career or what it would mean. But I just wanted to talk to him about it. So I called him, and he was surprised by how much it affected me. And that became the first 15 minutes of the conversation. All I had to do was constantly reassure Paul that it hadn't hurt me that much, that it was okay. And then in the months that followed, he actually gave me writing help with hours. I mean, he looked over pieces of mine and helped me show the structure. He made entire figures to show what my argument was like. It was really stuff that students, just so many hours, and it would always be possible. And then I'd see 100 publications of him stopping by that he was writing in the meantime, and I was wondering, how the hell are you doing this? But he was just always there. And in the past weeks, I've just come to realize that's gone, and I'm very grateful for what there is, but it's hard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. David, and I know you wanted to do a little audio visual thing, so let me see if I open this up so it's screen share. So you should be able to share. Let me know if you're having issues.
Thanks. I want to say a few words first, if I can. First of all, how much I appreciate, and as I talked to a few of us, how much I also was looking forward and dreading this, looking forward to be with other people who loved and knew Paul and to share, and also dreading because it becoming more real, which is hard. It's inconceivable for anyone, and I think it's the further you are, it's even harder to grasp. And I met Paul first 18 years ago. I was visiting Michelle Saylor's in Indiana in 2005, and I guess he heard that I was visiting her, and he invited me to give a talk. And I was so excited because I loved his work. I was a fan of his and his work on narratives. And that evening, after the talk, he invited me to come over for dinner, and I had dinner with Judy and Mercedes, and did a barbecue. And little did I know it was the beginning of a deep friendship and an inspiring collaboration. As Ilanit said, I was so excited. I wanted to introduce my friends with this new great guy that I can't believe that he actually, I thought it would be forever only that name in the paper. So I was so glad to introduce him to Phil shortly after, and then with Ilanit, and just enriched all of our friendships and collaborations. And so I was thinking about the things that many things I'll miss, but the things that I'll miss most. We had several visits in Israel and Indiana, and different conferences and trainings in different places over the years. And of course, it was just the unusual experience, just sitting down with him and just playing with ideas. I mean, that was just so fun. It's just like you can think anything, you can share, you can imagine, you can dream, you can and I'll miss that terribly. The last thing that we did together the night before he died, I actually submitted the introduction to the special issue that we guest edited together. It's like Rehab Journal, about how arts, engaging in arts and the humanities can enrich our understanding of recovery. And we did a paper about jazz and psychotherapy, and I just can't believe how. And then the next morning I woke up and I got the news, and it was just like, I can't believe how we completed that project, because it was something we're playing with ideas for years. I don't know if either of us ever thought that we'd really make this happen. So that's one thing. Another thing is, it's like everyone knows how personal he was, and also maybe there's something about meeting occasionally but very intensely, for a few days here and a few days there, and that we had like a lot of opportunities also to stay at each other's places, and like nights that we had a lot of time. It wasn't between things, and he was just a wonderful friend. And 18 years, there's certainly times that of difficulties and pain, and he just was a wonderful supporting friend. I hope I was to him, and I just will miss his friendship so much. I think the moments I was most moved was when he would sometimes sign the emails like "your friend," or sometimes when we would say goodbye, he would say "goodbye, brother," and hug me. And like I was like that of him calling me brother was like, I felt so honored and close and delighted. And then another something, and the last thing that I'll mention of that I'll miss terribly is how wild and crazy and fun and playful he was. I mean, and that just those strange WhatsApps he would send, with all these ambiguous texts, which would leave room for endless projections and laughter. And so I went to share. There's so many lines also that I remember of him, but one is that I repeat the most is it's all about going along with the changes. Isn't there a single person that I know that doesn't remember me saying this many times, alluding it to Paul? I don't know if he made it up or not, but that's where I heard it from. So I was thinking about this whole thing is about like going along with the changes. And I'll be forever grateful for the opportunity I had when he visited us here in Israel recently in March, first trip out of the United States after the COVID. And I just can't believe, and looking back, I just can't believe how precious it was that I got to see him like that. And I'll see if I can do this. I try to want to share a few photos that he from a while back. But I had it on my screen. Sorry. So this is my daughter, who's now almost 17. And this is here, she's 2 years old, or 3 years old. And this is Paul playing with her in our backyard. I just love these photos because, it was like she was a little girl. They didn't speak the same language. And they were having so much fun together. So you see he's playing with the glasses, playing with a hat. And then this picture is the one I'd like to remember, mostly Paul. When you see how gentle, of course, with the wine. I mean, that's not, you would never give up the wine, but then with his right hand, holding this little girl, he can't even speak the same language. And you see his eyes closed and you feel his tenderness. And so I just want to share these with you, and so grateful for everything I had with Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Ben, would you like to share some words?
Sure. So I wrote a couple things down that I'll read here. So much we all share. There's also, everyone has a special relationship with Paul, but also some things that are different. So hopefully I'm emphasizing some things that are specific to my experience. So I met Paul in 2007, right after I had graduated high school, actually, before I started college, when I was an unpaid volunteer transcribing IPPEs. And I count it among the absolute most fortunate things in my life that one of my first professional experiences was to sit quietly and listen through headphones to the stories of people diagnosed with schizophrenia, and beyond that, like unbelievably, to be supervised by Paul Lysaker. So he taught me how to think with another person as a clinician. Others have used those words as I developed from an unpaid volunteer to an RA, and then eventually to a collaborator, to a clinical psychologist myself. Now, as a researcher also studying schizophrenia today, I wouldn't be a clinical psychologist, I wouldn't be a researcher if it weren't for Paul, just no question. No one I've ever known is more gifted at understanding and finding people in the fog of psychosis, just period. When I'm at my absolute best as a therapist, it's Paul's voice I hear in my head. Second thing I want to say that he taught me is how to find meaning in great works of art and writing. Others have talked about that. I tried to just kind of make a list of some of those things. Books by Paul Auster, Jesus' Son, Austerlitz, writings of Borges, Milan Kundera, also Mahler, Bruckner, Arvo Part, the movie The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, No Country for Old Men. I could go on and on, things we talked about. I learned from him that the best way to learn to be more curious, open, and humane with our patients was to be more curious, open, and humane with how we engage with art. Third, he taught me how to savor. Occasionally, when I worked with him at the VA, all those summers kind of leading through my training, we'd sneak out for lunch, sometimes with my mom, who many of you all know, Kelly, all three of us, or on occasion, just Paul and me. We'd usually go to the Chinese food buffet on 10th Street, the salad bar at Riley, or if there was lots of time, the Indian restaurant in Alabama. And At those lunches, no matter what we were eating, no matter how greasy or banal or run of the mill it was, he would comment on how delicious he truly savored. After a visit another summer in 2015, I found this in an email. He sent me an email at almost 11 p.m. and I quote, "If you are awake, Jupiter and Venus are close together in the west and appear amazing." His glee with which he reveled in absurd nicknames, jokes, pranks, this was another form of savoring life, I think. He stared with clear eyes at life's suffering, and at the same time, he could find the miraculous in every day. And I think those two things were connected to each other. Again, after Paul died, I went through emails I exchanged with him over the years to hear his voice again. And one message that he wrote me gave me comfort. I was 19 at the time, and I was a college sophomore. Excuse me, I didn't expect to see that. And wrote him a few things about, it was really cringy. I was 19, I was writing about wanting to be present and appreciate my study abroad trip ahead that I was about to embark on. It's cringy to my 35-year-old self now, but of course he responded with heart and seriousness. And I'm gonna quote it here, and it's fragmentary Paul shorthand, but he said, "Borges wrote a short story about the fate of the immortal gods. Basically, they just became something like giant salamanders who sunned themselves all day with little consciousness, or so I remember from 20 years ago. I took the point to be that reflection on death as a daily reality makes a lunch of a hot dog and onions in a small sleeping room poignant and meaningful, just as it does for your room now, for your trip now." He was talking about how staring directly at one's mortality could make us realize life as we were living it. And his loss is enormous. It still doesn't feel real. It doesn't change anything, but I'm comforted now that the enormity of Paul's loss is proportional to the deep gratitude I feel that he was in my life. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ben. We do have a few minutes left before we need to wrap up. Does anyone else like to make some comments or have something to say? I guess either raise your virtual hand or drop into the chat. Jackie, thank you. Oops, I'm sorry, it's Josh.
Oh, hi. So I'll only speak for myself, although I know John Purcell was there, but one of my kind of favorite closing memories of Paul was he came to Temple to give a talk in June. And it felt like a treat for me to have him in front of me reviewing merit for me for about 2 hours. But one of the best parts was how the evening ended, which was at a fairly unclean dive bar in Philadelphia, talking about what it means to be a person just so casually, and enjoying having a mentor of 10 years just be there, uncomplicated in that space, having a pretty human experience, and just experiencing that great simplicity for something that was so complicated. And also having my wife point out to me very, very much over the past 2 weeks how many of my phrases that I use all the time in clinical work appear to be directly lifted from Paul. So I'm just thinking a lot about that.
Thank you, Josh. John?
So hello, everyone. I just really wanted to thank everyone for sharing stories and for being here. It's incredibly heartwarming to hear that he was always himself, because these stories are the same, you know, these are the stories everyone tells, and it's renders him more admirable in my mind, that someone could be so unflinchingly themselves, but also so unflinchingly tender and caring. And he was always present. He took great joy, like you're all saying, in lots of things, even some things probably that maybe weren't as delicious as he thought they were. And I guess I want to say, though, I've obviously known him a long time, and I've worked with him But he took so much pleasure in his time with you all. He spoke about all of you all the time, how much joy it gave him. And I just want you all to know that as present as he was in your life, you were in his.
Thank you so much, John. Piper?
Thank you for this opportunity. It's really heartwarming to see so many friends and colleagues today. Paul touched my career, my life in a very significant way early on. I remember when he first moved to Indiana, and at the beginning of my graduate school career, my mentor saying, "You're going to go learn to do the pans, and Paul Lysaker is going to teach you how to do the pans." And I remember sitting in those sessions, learning from him how to make sense of this and talk to people with schizophrenia and elicit information in a really thoughtful, caring, kind way. And then I was really fortunate enough to have him be my first practicum supervisor when he moved over to the VA. And I credit Paul. I was very nervous about getting started and how do I do this and what does this look like and what does therapy really mean? And he was always so kind and patient and never made this seem hard. It always seemed easy to him, and he was happy to share how that worked for him with so many of us. And I credit him with helping me to feel comfortable with therapy and think about new ways to really do that and how to deliver that in a thoughtful, kind, and caring way. And I feel like I've taken that, what I've learned with him, with me, and shared that in my career. And what has been really heartwarming over the years is that so many of the students that I've worked with are also connected to Paul, and you see how small and how big this community that we're all part of has become. And it's just so meaningful how many people he's touched and how many of us he's changed so profoundly. I will share one of my favorite anecdotes about Paul, which is when we would go in his office and all of the action figurines that he would have around. And I will forever think of Paul's office with the 2 X-Files figurines that he had when I was there. And we would often make jokes about them. And it was a highlight to go in there and know that we could kind of let loose and have fun and make jokes. So I do appreciate that about him. But he's forever touched me in a very profound way. And I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Piper. Chris?
Thank you, Reed. I'm one of the Brisbane crew here in Australia with Robert Schweitzer, and I've been doing almost for a year now with Paul, the online consultations. And I just want to thank everyone for sharing your stories so far about Paul. I kind of was listening and kind of getting really jealous hearing it at the joy and laughter and meaning that had been shared with Paul. And that's something that I was really looking forward to experiencing when Paul was due to come out to Brisbane. I was really fantasizing about, he just looked like a fellow that would give a fantastic hug. And that's all I really wanted to do when I saw him, was to just give him a huge hug to thank him for the influence he's had on my career and personal life so far. And that's without even having met him in person. I work in a pretty difficult setting within the public mental health system here in Brisbane. And I don't think I would have lasted in the job so as long as I have without the influence of Merritt and Paul, and just his teachings around that no human is beyond the realms of connection. and the messages that and the personal touch that he brought to his clinical work, and that's what really drew me to Merit. And I'm so privileged to have had that in my life, and I'm so shocked at how much it's affected me for someone that I've never actually met in person, although I have to keep telling myself that he became a pretty big part of my Saturday morning routines. You know, no matter how many wines were consumed on a Friday night, I would be up on a Saturday morning ready to have those Merit consultations, and they really were a highlight. It has lit a fire within me, and a passion to continue my learnings with Merit, and to keep engaging with people on a human level within the work. So thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for sharing your stories. It was a real privilege to be a part of this today.
Thank you so much, Chris. Jay?
Yeah, thanks, Reed. I'll keep this brief, but I am just so moved to see so many friends and people that I've met along the way, or people that I've heard about through Paul. This network is incredibly important. Thankful to Paul for bringing me into it. As I was listening to many of you, I had so many, similar memories from different points in my relationship with him. The first time he found out that I had a paper accepted, and he gave me a big hug spontaneously. But I found myself thinking about the shift from being a student and feeling like I was really starting to help him out with his project, to where it became clear to me that we were, truly collaborating, and it was a shared project, not just something I was helping somebody I admired out with. I remember after I graduated, I'd gone to a talk at University of Indianapolis, and that he was giving, and he was quite excited to have a break so he could talk to me about the paper that he wanted to start working on, and he referred to it as our project, not the paper, but all of this. And it was it's like sort of a shock to me. Yeah, an important one. But as I was listening to many of you, I flashed forward in time a little bit to this wonderful conference that our hospital was able to host several years ago. Many of you, Eleni and Phil, you're able to travel here to present. It was such an exciting thing, and Paul was, of course, a centerpiece of it, and he is the keynote speaker. And he had heard for years Bethany and I talk about our struggles trying to make inroads with systems issues and different administrators, et cetera, as many of you have similar stories. But there's this moment during question and answer where an administrator asks him a question about making an impact on how systems approach recovery as it relates to serious mental illness. And Paul, he sort of knows the context and the background of the question. And instead of just launching into a brilliant answer, which I'm sure he had lined up, he sort of thoughtfully says, actually, I'm not really sure how to answer that. It's not something that I've directly worked with too much. If I were you, I would ask Jay and Bethany. They're the real experts on this. I learned from them. And it had that blend of a little bit of mischief making. He knew that he was sort of subverting the question a little bit. But it truly was sort of lifting up his colleagues. And as I think about just moving forward without him literally able to be in my ear, I think about how important that has been, that he's been able to teach me how to find my own voice, even within a shared project. And I think I'll stop there, but I am so glad to have this little bit of time with all of you, and look forward to many more conversations with you.
Thank you so much, Jay. Would you like to share some words?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. I'm sorry. I've been going back and forth about whether or not I'll say anything because yeah, because I don't have anything prepared, but I started working with Paul as a practicum student, like many other folks here. After 1 year said, I want to keep doing this. I was learning something I wasn't getting in my academic program. And then because of that work, I had the opportunity to stick around during internship. And like many people have sort of mentioned, it's in the desire to work with Paul. I got to meet like my best friend who, and have had the chance to meet so many other people through connecting with Paul that I just didn't think. So what felt like a really small world for so long, even when I left and moved to Connecticut, the world didn't feel so small anymore. I felt like I had people in every corner. I met people at the, 1,000 miles away that knew Paul's work and were interested in learning about it. I fast forward to just a week ago on Monday, we have our new interns starting this coming week, and we met with them, and one of them said, hey, this thing Merit that I read about that you're published in, is that something we can learn about? It sounds really interesting. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just pick up the phone and tell Paul, hey, there's someone that has never worked with you that wants to learn about your work. Can you come and give a talk? That was what I wanted to do. We had him come and do so many talks here, and to think about moving forward and having to be the people to do that without him being there to kind of give that reassurance and that support feels tough. I think about one memory when the shift happened from becoming an intern to becoming a colleague, I guess. He had invited me and Emily and Kelly over to have wine. And the whole goal of this meeting was to teach us about wine. And despite leaving feeling really confident that I could teach people about wine then, I don't know that I really remember anything, but that's kind of what Paul did, is he just instilled this confidence that you can be your authentic self, you can bring your knowledge into the space, and you can use your voice. And so that was really powerful for me. It's something I try really hard to continue to emulate every day with my trainees that come in. It's just so special, and it just doesn't go away. I don't know. I don't have much else to say. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your words. Before we finish up with Bethany, there's a couple things I'd like to add. There's a couple folks, Elena and Simone have added some comments in the chat, and I'm not sure if folks are following along, but those are there. If you'd like to take a look at those. Pulling this together is sort of an international group effort. I really appreciate the assistance of Phil and David and Elenit and Jay and Bethany to kind of get this organized, get the word out, and kind of let everyone know in Paul's incredibly broad and diverse network that we're trying to do this. I appreciate everyone's coming here and spending time with us together. Bethany, would you like to add a few words?
Yeah, thanks, Reed. I hope that you all forgive me for reading my thoughts to you. I would usually prefer to speak from the heart in a moment like this, but in this case, my grief has been making it just really challenging to form coherent thoughts. My attempts to speak freely recently seem to end up being quite fragmented and difficult to follow, as we all know can happen when someone is experiencing pain. I had the opportunity to talk about Paul and my relationship with him at his services in Indiana a few weeks ago. I thought about trying to read those remarks again today, but it just didn't feel quite right. In those thoughts, I described how my work with Paul, in which we tried to write about complex human experience, was guiding my writing about losing him, and that while my words never feel quite adequate, there is something to be gained in the process of writing and revising. And so when I looked at that draft of my grief, I knew that I was already revising it, moving to the next phase. In my previous draft, I tried to capture the blend of Paul that made me so appreciate and cherish our relationship, noting his impressive intelligence and ability to balance silliness and humor with incredible emotional depth. I wanted to capture something similar today, but found myself really struggling for humor, which isn't really like me. I think I've reached a point in my grief where I'm just very sad, and the humor is a little harder to find, but I know that it will come again. And that was a key part of my relationship with Paul, and I think was a reason that he enjoyed my company as well. Paul would always say that you can't decide on your own if you're funny. Other people have to think so too. He would often deliver that line and then look impishly over at Kelly Buck, who, true to the joke, would never laugh. It was perfect. I, on the other hand, was quick to laugh at Paul's jokes, not always because they were good, but because he delighted in them so much. And I am very susceptible to dad humor. Jay and I were talking about Paul the other day and came to the realization that perhaps the best compliment that you could ever give Paul is to tell him that he was funny or to laugh at his jokes. He was so often the smartest person in the room and could offer any number of clever ideas or insightful solutions to a problem. But I think that more than anything else, he liked to know that other people were tickled by the same things that he was. So even though the humor is hard for me to find today, there have been several thoughts that have occurred to me in the last few weeks since Paul's passing that I'd like to share with you all. I've been reflecting a lot on my relationship with Paul, and one moment that stands out to me over and again is when I was wrapping up my time at the VA. I was saying goodbye to patients I'd seen weekly for 3 years, and it was really hard. Paul and I processed those goodbyes, what they were like, and what my time with each of those patients meant. I shared at one point that I felt like a different person leaving than I was when I first met them. And Paul looked up and said, "Of course you are." He described that in his view, truly connecting with another human being was transformative. And that if you're really doing this work, you would be changed by each person that you encountered in a genuine way. I believe that too. I look for this in students that I take on. It's a clear sign to me that something is working when the student can reflect on how much they have changed as a result of meeting with their patients. I'm also changed by my time with Paul. He challenged me, he encouraged me, he allowed me space to be vulnerable, and more than anything, he taught me how to think and to find others to think with. And while I don't know that I got a whole lot of good jokes from my time with Paul, he certainly taught me to find and appreciate the humor that is present, even in the dark times. One of the things that stands out for me from today and from other moments in which I have been listening to others share about Paul is how similar so many of our accounts of him are. Obviously, each of us had our own unique connection to Paul with our own set of stories, inside jokes, and nicknames. But the larger overarching story of a man who was warm, mischievous, and incredibly intelligent is the same across the board. There's something so comforting to me in this time of loss to hear him reflected in all of your memories of him. He feels a bit more alive to me as we remember him together and each hold our memories of this wonderful man in our minds. Something that becomes clear to me when I look around in groups who hold Paul dear is that he was a magnet for people who are smart, compassionate, driven, and at least a little bit rebellious, because he was those things. And he found those qualities in others and he fostered them, connecting us through papers and projects, all with the aim to make life better for people with serious mental illness and to poke holes in the nonsense that is often handed down as a decree of what treatment should be. He often referred to the metacognition mafia and had a slew of comparisons for merit, including that merit is like a pirate ship, which of course he loved the imagery of being a grizzled and goofy pirate. But his most recent one was my favorite. Merit is punk rock. And as someone who firmly grew up in punk rock counterculture, this felt very apt to me, because Paul knew and valued the idea that to do this kind of meaningful work is subversive. In a world that wants us to worry about risk management, impact factors, rules, and treatment plans, Paul wanted to do the radical thing and connect with the humans in the room instead. I feel so grateful to exist in spaces like this, spaces full of thoughtful people who can appreciate the spirit of rebelliousness that comes with truly trying to do meaningful work. It feels like quite the antidote to some of the more bureaucratic spaces that I have to sometimes occupy. And I think that this is part of Paul's legacy too, the connections and the network that he created in all of us. Many of you have reached out during the time since Paul's passing to make it clear how dedicated you are to carrying on the work. I think a lot of us feel this pressure now that he is gone, that this can't be a sandcastle that washes away. And it won't, because it's bigger than Paul, because he wanted all of us to have our own part in growing the project. And so it won't just be maintained, it will grow and it will evolve and it will continue to be something new, inspired by him, but carried on by those of us who hear him, as he once described himself to me, as the mosquito buzzing in our ears, compelling us not to rest on our laurels, but to continue to think. He smiled when telling me this, really pleased of this idea to think of himself as a little buzzing bug that kept someone moving, feeling compelled to move and not to go to sleep. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. I look forward to our continued collaboration, our continued dedication to do serious work without taking ourselves too seriously, spurred on by the mosquito Paul, who we were all so incredibly lucky to know and call our friend.